Hello viewers, I'm SB, and I'm here to talk about Observation and the, two thoughts that I had about it. And I know, I can hear what you're saying. 2 thoughts? This video took like a month to put together, how is it just 2 thoughts? Well, that's how long it takes, man. I'm thinking as fast as I can over here, stop judging me. A little while ago, I said in the Final Thoughts video for Sunless Skies that I think many video games try to hew too close to the narrative conventions in terms of both writing and visual presentation of film, and that's often detrimental because there are some pretty significant differences between video games and film and the way that people engage with and consume them, and some games try to navigate that problem by siloing off all of their story content into cutscenes that are just little films that aren't really related to the gameplay, and that approach has its own whole mess of problems, and getting into all of that stuff would be an undertaking that is beyond the scope of this video. Probably worth a couple videos of its own. I don't know if I'm the right person to make those. But Observation provides a decent example of what I'm talking about when I say that, and maybe an interesting counterexample as well. Obviously, Observation is very heavily influenced by a certain strain of science fiction movie, of which 2001: A Space Odyssey is definitely the most prominent example, and I think it really succeeds at reproducing some of the feeling of those films, which it was obviously trying to do. And you might say, well, of course it can do what those movies can do, it's basically just a movie itself. And let's not look too deeply into the phrase, just a movie, hopefully the meaning is clear there. But I think where Observation succeeds most as a game is in the way it uses its interactivity to bolster and even sometimes create those feelings of otherworldliness and tension that are core to that subgenre. This experience works in a way that it just wouldn't as a static film, because of the fact that you, the player, have to make the moves, even if you're not really making any decisions when you make those moves. It's a little harrowing to make yourself navigate to a camera where you can see Jim's face the first time you see him, right? Or the scenes where the hexagon communicates with Sam. In a movie, those would probably lead viewers mostly to be wondering, what is happening? They're trying to comprehend the greater picture. But because you have to repeat the message back to it, your focus in the moment is shifted more to what is being said. Observation is telling a story that could be told, and arguably mostly has been told, in film, but it uses its interactivity to create an experience of that story that I don't think could exist in a film, which is interesting. And 2 thoughts emerge from that for me. First, I recognize that somewhere in there I said the phrase, where Observation succeeds most as a game, which sort of unavoidably raises the question of whether it did, in fact, succeed as a game. That's, if not a trick question, at least a tricky question, because the word game is so overloaded. It has such a broad range of meanings, and people very rarely specify exactly what they mean by it when talking about it. So, if by game we mean a thing that has mechanically interesting systems, engagement with which yields varying degrees of success and failure, and that is about, learning to manipulate those systems, then no, Observation, fails pretty badly. And I definitely saw comments suggesting that people were viewing it that way, right? This is not much of a game. But that definition, although you might suspect from the kinds of games I usually play that might be the definition I usually use for the word, honestly just doesn't sit well with me. It's too constraining. It elides a whole lot of really fascinating stuff that's out there that wouldn't be the same if it were expressed in a static form, that needs that interactivity to be what it is. And thinking that has me rethinking that thing I said about narrative conventions at the top of the video, because it turns out to really only be true for a pretty narrow slice of the things that I would call games. There's plenty of room in the world and in my library for things like Observation or Her Story or Florence. So, I don't think there was anything wrong with the form that Observation took. I don't think the linearity or the thinness of the mechanics is necessarily damning. Unfortunately, I don't think that Observation specifically was great. The story was weak. I think it would have benefited from examining the issues of consciousness that it raised in more depth, as well as maybe a more ambiguous ending, which you could kind of hear me thinking out loud as we were approaching the ending. And I think the sometimes not great facial animations brought down the character-focused aspects of the experience, which is really a shame, considering how effective I found the voice acting, especially Emma's. But I think the problems here are mostly in the execution, rather than structural. The other major thought that I had is that you all were having a fundamentally different experience here than I did. I've spent a lot of this video talking about the difference between the extant interactive version of Observation and some theoretical static movie version of it, but the majority experience here actually was a static movie version of the interactive game experience. I've been on that side of things like this as well. I know what it's like. I never played Until Dawn, but I did watch a number of Let's Players do it. So we have the question of, if the experience of Observation worked better for me because for me it was interactive, because I had to do the things with my own human hands, how much of that carries over to you? How much does you knowing that it's interactive carry over to you the effects of that interactivity? The short answer is some, I think, but it's an extremely complicated question, really, because it's going to be different for each person, and in each circumstance, we're talking about a lot of complex and subtle relationships here. Between me and the work, between you and me, between you and the work, and there's so many elements of my presentation that figure in so heavily to this. The answer is going to be affected by 1,000 different very complicated things, some of which I was trying to get at during that last episode. So I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between the work I'm playing while recording and the work I'm making by recording. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of historical guideposts for how to do a good job at this thing. The thing I think of most is Mystery Science Theater 3000. If you're not familiar, it's a show where the crew of the show watches a bad old movie, really bad, usually, and they talk and make jokes over it. And even though their whole thing is more mocking of their underlying media than mine is, or at least than mine usually is, there's a kind of respect there. The jokes go around the dialogue, not over top of it. They're trying to obscure the movie as little as possible. So like I said, I've been thinking about it a lot, and even after all that thinking, I still don't really know what I'm doing here. I don't have any idea what my ideal video output looks like. What's the best Let's Play that I could produce? I don't know. And I'm certainly not going to figure out before this recording comes to a close. But I think there's something there, right? I can at least aspire to that standard, obscuring as little as possible. Okay, hopefully nobody was looking for any concrete answers on that one, except on the subject of whether I thought this game was great or not. That is going to be it for us for today. Thank you all so much for watching, for getting through this whole series. Not that it was a particularly long or difficult chore. But that's going to be it for Observation here on the channel. Come back next time, tomorrow, for something else. And we'll see you then.